Hello, this is Rich Long, Executive Director of the Learning First Alliance. This is the third in a series of 3 podcasts that LFA is doing with David Ocean of the AIR, American Institutes for Research. David is Vice President and a longtime scholar. He's also the editor in book, which these podcasts are slightly based around, and that is Creating Safe, Equitable, and Engaging Schools. This podcast is with a group of students that David brought together in the summer of 2022 to talk about their perception of equity and what this means. And we all know that equity is an important concept and a very contentious concept. I'd like you to listen and understand how each of the students and collectively how the students are defining equity, and not so much focus on the word, because we all know that when we move away from the simple definition, that what we're finding is that people sometimes mishear the meaning of the word rather than understand that it is something that most of us do appreciate, that regardless of who you are, where you are in the social order, that schools are a place where opportunity is developed to bring out each of our natural abilities and hopefully actually help us to go beyond that. David, this is an interesting set of observations we're going to hear from the students. How do you see equity focusing in with the other parts of creating safe, equitable, and engaging schools?
Thanks, Rich. Equity is both an experience that people have individually, and they have it in different parts of their lives. And it is also an experience that people have as members of groups. I think that what we can hear from the students is something that is fundamental to our goals of supporting the learning needs of all students. And that is, how does equity affect them and their peers, and what can be done to promote more equitable environments? I think when we listen to them, we are able to go beyond the labels that you were talking about, Rich, and to really connect to issues that I think are fundamental to the hopes of Americans as citizens of a country that historically made commitments to equity and over its history has struggled with those commitments, but at different points of time has really been able to move forward in making sure that more people experience that equity.
David, as we're listening to this section on equity, what do you think the highlights are going to be?
Well, I think the highlights is that equity, which people define in different ways, is on the one hand, whether or not you feel like you're being treated fairly and to some extent equally, but it's not just about fairness. It really is about what are the opportunities that people experience that can support their ability to succeed as learners, to succeed as human beings, to succeed as members of the school community, and to succeed as citizens who are developing.
I think you've given us a good lens to listen to this next section.
What is it like to experience an environment that is richly equitable? And it may be that you never have experienced that environment, and therefore the answer could also be, what would it be like?
This can go a variety of different ways, because academically speaking, I've grown up in a very diverse community. You've mainly seen Hispanic and Latinx families, when you see Black and African American families, Middle Eastern families here in the area. When it came to me, and it's an example, from going to high school, one thing that I really liked was seeing diversity, and I like seeing opportunity, because I think a lot of times social media can also take a huge part into students and learning and what ways they want to start leaning towards how they want to start being treated or how they want to be seen. The way I took in high school was, I'm going to make the most of it. And luckily for the school that here I attend in Prince George's County, they actually offered a career and technology education program, CTE, in our high school. So I saw cosmetology, I saw nursing programs, you see construction programs, you see a whole bunch of variety of different things that a lot of us can start at a very young age. And I think that's very important, because at the end of the day, students would want to feel whatever they're working for, whatever they're trying to achieve, something good is going to come out of it. It's going to be worth it at the end, no matter how many struggles they probably have to go through or how hard it must have been to get to where they are now. Because unfortunately, it's not that simple for everyone to achieve their goals. But I think that can really make a difference is growing up learning and being taught from educators that look like you. I would definitely want to see, more Hispanic and Latinx educators, more Black and African American educators, because not only would you be able to see a difference in learning techniques, but you could also be able to see the change when it comes to youth, because they're starting to see they could actually grow up to be where their educators are, where their teachers are, where their administrators are, their principals are. And with that being said, those same educators, they're setting an example. They're letting the youth, they're letting the students know, yes, I look like you and I can understand you. I can understand your needs or I can relate to you. And not only that, but they could also hold a higher expectation for these students, a higher standards for these students, and let it be hold at least if the students would be able to see at least one educator that looks like them sometime over the years of them being in school, whether it's in elementary school, middle school, high school, that could really be the only thing needed for them to actually be encouraged to attend college, university, to hold higher expectations for themselves and start seeing more things that they could get into as they grow older. I think that would play a huge part. And another thing was open-mindedness, because you never know. You could be surrounded by a diverse group of people one day and the next day you're brought into a whole different environment, a whole different community, and you could often feel drawn out, left out. You could often feel afraid to speak on certain things because, again, not everyone has the same techniques or has the same views that everyone else does or everyone else grows to have. And I think another thing would be programs and different extracurricular activities like after-school programs, summer programs. These other support groups outside of the schools and school districts could only do so much for some students, could only do so much to offer the schools. But at the end of the day, I think conversations end up leading to how can an issue be fixed? How can issues be prevented from these students taking unnecessary steps to not end up in the bad path? But I think at the end of the day, it all comes back down to foundation, not necessarily what the students need to be fixed, but what we can do within the system so that we can ensure everyone is on the right track, everyone feels safe, everyone feels understood and has a voice.
I think equitable environment begins with consistency. I think that it starts with the administration as well as educators. And for me personally, at my high school, they preached discipline, respect, and responsibility. It was written on the walls of every classroom. And it was something that was constantly said. I think that was something that was consistent. Everyone went through the same disciplinary actions. Everyone was basically treated all with that same respect by each educator and administration.
I have experienced two very vastly different school settings in relation to equity. One school I felt was exceedingly equitable and respectful and accepting. It was a very, very diverse high school, and I was very lucky to attend there. And I learned so much just from being present in a classroom of people who aren't like me, because I am a cis white woman who grew up in a small town. And I wasn't exposed to very much. So it was a learning curve for me about equity and what it looked like. Right after that, I moved back to a rural area where I am now. And it's the complete opposite, where we've had issues at our school in terms of equity. And it just felt like nobody was listening to us when we were voicing concerns or when the students were reaching out to the student senate that I work on with concerns. And we were trying to communicate that to administration. They just didn't seem to hear us. I feel like equity is where you're not just tolerated. That's what it felt like administration was trying to do by being equitable, was tolerating and accommodating, when in fact it should be a automatic thing where everybody is treated fairly, everybody is heard, and everybody has the resources they need to succeed. I think resources are a huge aspect in being equitable, and everybody is on the same playing ground. That doesn't mean give every student $500. It means giving the students who need it $500. Now they're on the same playing field. But equity in terms of race, I really think that you have to be open-minded and you have to take in all of the feedback that you can from as many different stakeholders as you can and act on that feedback. If my school took into account the student concerns and our feedback and our suggestions, then our school would be a lot more equitable. Unfortunately, it didn't seem like that happened. But if it was, that'd be a huge step in becoming more equitable. And I really think that you do have to take feedback seriously and not just do the bare minimum to become equitable, because all of your students are students and they're here to learn. They're here to engage. They're here to contribute. I feel like students now are very looked down upon and we're very dumbed down. And I feel like at times we're not respected as human beings with opinions and who want to be useful and who want to contribute and who want to join in on big, important conversations like this. So being open-minded, huge, huge deal when it comes to equity.
I would say where everyone has equal opportunities. It will be an environment where everyone has equal opportunities. And I don't think I've experienced that so far, because even in school, teachers are supposed to treat students the same, but sometimes they tend to focus more on students with the good grades, and sometimes they focus more on students with the bad grades. In my school, because there are so many kids with bad grades, they tend to focus more on them, give them more support, emotional, academic support, and they sometimes tend to neglect achieving ones, although they might be good with their studies and everything, but they might also need some emotional support. But I would say where everyone has equal opportunity, where everyone voices are, which doesn't always happen.
Equity is a really difficult topic, not just to understand, but to try and achieve. I don't realistically think that we will achieve equity in education anytime in the future or possibly ever, just because it's not, I don't think it's possible to be perfect. I think we can try and go the best we can. But for me, what equity looks like is, do I look around? Can I see other people who are different than me? And can I be safe in that area? Intellectually, physically, emotionally, etc. Because I don't think equity means that everyone has to agree or everyone thinks the same thing. As long as there are people who look different, who have different opinions, who are from different backgrounds, and you are able to respect all of them and you know how to respect all of them, and you feel safe in expressing your opinions and just having your space there, and you feel there are like chances for everyone to take a different role, even if that means like not everyone can do everything. Like even if you can't speak at all of the board meetings or whatever, if you feel like you still can have an established role, and I think that's what we should be striving for, regardless of if it's in the classroom or other government body.
To me, similar to what Michelle said, a big part of equity in a school setting is feeling comfortable enough to speak your own opinion and feel recognized. Even if everyone in the room has a different idea or opinion than you, I believe that when there's true equity in a classroom setting, students can be at ease and not constantly have to be worried about not being heard or being ignored or being treated differently than their peers. Because all those fears and all those worries, they take away from the actual learning. And now instead of being in the classroom, you're learning something new, you're having fun, you're always worried about, can I speak freely? Am I a part of the classroom setting or am I just on the outside? I think that when you take away inequity, you can introduce comfort, and that's when the learning and the education can really start. And students can feel free to learn and feel free to be themselves in their own classroom.
What advice would you give to the members of the Learning First Alliance, the different organizations and their members, regarding what schools could do to make environments that were more equitable for everybody?
As far as advice, I would say just be vocal, and I think take into account the experiences basically of the students that you'll be affecting, thinking about the actions that need to happen, and talking about like equity, especially, you have to think about the students first. You can't take into consideration anyone else until you've talked to students or until you've heard about their stories and what they've been through maybe, or the experiences at their specific schools.
I would say creating organizations that allow students to voice their opinions, and not just students, also teachers, because sometimes teachers' voices are disregarded. Create organizations that would allow students and teachers' voices to be heard.
I would say that there are two main ways that I have seen as successful from the student perspective. One of the ways is to obviously increase exposure and awareness and respect for communities that are not around you. So communities that you don't really know about or students don't really have much exposure about. My school district, there's a lot of Asian people and white people here, but we still have a Black and African American community coordinator, as we have for most of our communities of color, because it's still important that they feel supported and still important that we have the chance to learn about how different cultures interact with education and how we can best support them. And the second way is trying to adapt when you're in an environment where you don't really know what to change. You could assume that everything is like decently equitable and you don't really know what to change. I doubt that really anyone's position, but for those people, I've seen success when they try to dig deeper within their own students, because students will always find something that they think people can change. And as well through teachers. I think instead of going out into the world and trying to find things that can improve their school district from there, it's more helpful usually to take that time and effort and money into the teachers and the students and the IAs and faculty and their opinions and questions and improvements.
You never want to tell someone to try to control what students are saying and whatnot, because it's very hard, especially in a high school setting. Students, they tend to say what they want to say. But I do think it's important for teachers to monitor the response to the student. So if somebody said something and another student says something disrespectful in response to that opinion, we can maybe help them restructure it in a way that it's not so disrespectful, but it's still a response and there can be a healthy flow of ideas. I think that's important. Having teachers and students be able to facilitate conversations in a way so that there can be a respectful exchange of ideas. That's probably the biggest thing, just making sure that everybody's being respectful to each other in the classroom, making sure that everything is spread evenly. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but making sure that specific students aren't being picked on either by the teacher, like consistently asking them questions, even if the student obviously does not know the answer to those questions, or students picking on a student for whatever reason. I think that it's important to make sure that questions are being asked evenly to everybody in the classroom. It's important to make sure that nobody is feeling any additional unnecessary pressures that could take away from the education happening in the classroom.
David, that was really insightful. The students have a multidimensional sense of what you call fairness and equity from your opening. I think they've given us something really to think about here about what they want in the concept of equity. And it is not clearly something that is just handed to them. It's not a passive activity on their part.
Yes, Rich. One of the themes that you have raised in other work that we have done together is the word in the title of the book, creating safe, equitable, engaging schools. And I think what we heard from the students today is the important role that both adults can play in creating spaces where people experience equity, where people experience opportunity structures, not just an opportunity, but pathways to be able to be even more successful, pathways to enrichment, pathways to well-being, and also the importance of listening to students to understand what are some of the things that are necessary to ensure that people experience equity, and at the same time to develop even better strategies and pathways for that. In addition, what we heard from the young people is the connection between equity and the safety, and the connection between equity and the ability to engage students in learning, and also to meaningfully engage students as members of the school community. In other work that I have been doing on equity, the definition and understanding that my colleagues and I have is that equity is not just individual, it's collective, and it's not just in the moment, it's over time. And it is not just objective, it is also subjective, how we think. But it is not just subjective, it is also the fact that there are concrete things that I experience that enable me to experience and or realize the implications of equity. And the students were telling us how to do it.
And also, we've heard in the other sessions that part of the entire constellation here is in all members having the ability to interact and participate actively in decision making where it applies to them.
And it is the all. I think that part of what is important in terms of meaningful equity, it is something that has to be universal. It will be experienced differentially. And it may also mean that in order for equity to be realized, people may need disproportionate support and a reversal of constraining opportunity structures. But it's not just something one experiences alone or even within one's group. It also is something that is important for others as well.
While it's in the U.S. Constitution and implied in the Declaration of Independence that what we are working towards is to form a more perfect union, how does that translate to the locals?
Well, one of the places where people experience democracy is in the schools. And if the schools are places where young people feel that they are engaged, that they are respected, where their voice is heard, where they can participate, where they can be treated as co-equal human beings, they're experiencing a type of democracy that they can then play out in other places. And on the other hand, if they experience the school as being alienating, as being separating, as being ones that do not build on their strengths, but rather try to shush them up, that prepares them for a very different type of citizenship, which makes it much harder for us to realize that more perfect union that we create as citizens together.
I think, David, you've given us a lot to think about, a lot of tools in creating safe, equitable, and engaging schools, creating the nation of learners that we wish to be.